So far in these videos, we've talked about paperback books and we've talked about Amazon. Amazon, I think, is the key place where you want to have your books listed. But you need to be aware, if you're going to be a self-publisher, of aggregation sites, because there are other places that you might want to list your books. You might want to have them on Barnes & Noble. You might want to have them on Apple, on their outlets. You might want to have them on a Kobo, to be able to read on a Kobo. Well, that's fine, and you can go individually to each of those outlets to list your books. But the truth is, and I think you'll find that most indie authors will tell you this, that the majority of indie authors sell their books on Kindle. Some sell a lot on iBooks and some sell a lot on Kobo, but really the other contenders, nobody really sells many books on those at all. So when you're starting out, what I would recommend you do is you absolutely, I think, must list your book with KDP, with Amazon. Then you've got to choose which is right for you with CreateSpace and which is right for you with Ingram Spark. So choose one or other of those. And then you need to get your digital books onto the other channels. And this is where the aggregators come in, aggregation websites. The good news is that you don't have to list your ebook separately on all of these sites. For my tastes, there are two main aggregation sites. They are Draft2Digital, which is the one that I use, and Smashwords, which I have an account on, but I don't actually use. And probably Smashwords makes this clearer on the screenshot that you can see there. These aggregation sites allow you to upload your book once, and they will then distribute your ebook to lots of different outlets. So on the Smashwords screen there, you can see that if you upload with Smashwords, you can get to Kobo, iBooks, Barnes & Noble. I think they're probably the next most important outlets there. And then there are all sorts of others that you may or may not have heard of. Page Foundry, Oyster, Scribd, Overdrive. But I think the key sites there, the ones that I would be most keen on, are iBooks, Barnes & Noble and Kobo. Barnes & Noble really only because, you know, it's kind of a big outlet, even though its history or its future might not be secure. But of those, I've only ever heard of authors, if they're selling a lot of books. Most people are doing it on KDP, but if you find people who buck the trend, they're either doing it on iBooks or they're doing it on Kobo with their box sets. But really, no one is shifting loads of books on any of those other outlets. So that said, Draft2Digital also, if you list on Draft2Digital, will send your book to iBooks, to Barnes & Noble, to Kobo. It also sends to Oyster and to, I think it's Page Foundry. I don't know whether that exists anymore, actually. It's called something else now. To Oyster and to Scribd and to a couple of others that, frankly, you won't sell any books on. So the key outlets for aggregation sites are iBooks, Barnes & Noble and Kobo. That's kind of really where you need to make sure you can get listed. And you could do that on Draft2Digital or Smashwords. Now, for my tastes, Smashwords is a little bit old-fashioned and it needs a bit of a makeover. Draft2Digital, again, this is my opinion, my personal opinion, Draft2Digital is more innovative. They're always innovating and trying to make things better for authors. And I frankly think it's a lot easier to use. So I use Draft2Digital. And with Draft2Digital, I can upload my book once, and Draft2Digital then will automatically distribute it to multiple channels. Now, when I come to the videos where I'm showing you how to list on each of these outlets, you'll be able to make your own judgment about this. But what I would say to you is, the reality is that you're probably not going to sell most books on iBooks or Kobo. So what I would recommend that you do is upload to an aggregation service first, and then if you start to see Kobo, iBooks or even Barnes & Noble taking off for you, you might then decide, well, actually, I might as well list these individually on a different channel, directly on Kobo or directly on iBooks. Now, with Kobo, it's slightly different with Kobo because it's actually really easy to list on Kobo. So Kobo is the one channel that you might say, actually, I'm not going to list on an aggregator through Kobo. I'm actually going to go to Kobo directly and list there because it's so easy to do. And the advantage of that is actually you get better analytics, better information if you list directly on Kobo. iBooks could be pretty hard to list on. It's not the most user-friendly thing, so I would recommend actually that you list on iBooks through an aggregation service. And as for Barnes & Noble, you might as well just do it through an aggregation service. So I know that all seems fairly complicated if you haven't used these before, but the bottom line of this video is make sure that you use an aggregation service to list your books more widely, to get them, the digital versions of your books, out and about on more sites. My preferred one, my preferred outlet is Draft Digital. That's just a personal preference. Other people will tell you that they love Smashwords. I generally would recommend that you probably list your books on Kobo directly and not on an aggregation service, and that you use the aggregation service primarily to list on iBooks, which I think it is important to be listed on, and Barnes & Noble. The others, frankly, you're only going to make a handful of sales on anyway until one of them suddenly takes off, or starts shifting books by the bucket load. In reality, you're only going to sell a handful of books on those. That's most indie authors' experience. But the bottom line is, make sure that you check out both of those aggregation sites, see which one you prefer, and then make that your aggregation site of choice. Then you can make sure that you're getting your ebooks distributed much more widely.